Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Socializing Security. This week we are continuing our content from the HERS conference that we did back in March, and further continuing one really long session that we did on that around a risk summit. So as a reminder, this is going to be a continuation from last week's episode, and we'll continue into next week as well. Last week we talked about kind of how we approach risk from an ISO perspective. Milu talked about the roles all the different people will play as part of assessing risk and understanding where we should prioritize dealing with risk, how the different ways we can deal with risk, that kind of stuff. So super important you go back and listen to that. Her and I talk through a zero-day vulnerability situation from an IT perspective. How IT views that and how she as a risk officer would interview an IT leader in that scenario. This week, what we're going to do is continue, and again, this happened as one really long session at the HERS conference, so it'll be a little bit abrupt jumping straight into the next scenario, but the next scenario we're going to talk about is going to be a cloud outage data center type of an outage. How do you deal with the entire kind of disaster scenario going on there? And then from there, we'll roll into talking about some HR specific situations. We get that kind of threat actor coming in and essentially getting a job with the company unknown to us. So definitely another thing that's very real world and going on. So recommend you listen to last week's episode if you haven't already. If you need a refresher, might be a good time to go back and listen to it on extra speed, depending on how fast you normally listen to them. And, kind of at least the very first part of it where Milu talks before bringing me on about the concept of the risk summit. So with that, I will leave you to Milu to continue this conversation on the risk summit.
We're going to roll through, and now we're going to try to connect virtually with Robert Hug. And Rob, I'm definitely going to ask you to introduce yourself first before we kick it off.
All right. Hello there. My name is Robert Hug. I'm a senior manager platform data centers with a rather large company here. And then I also have a little consulting gig where I work with infrastructure as well. So I'm very happy to be here today and to talk about one of my favorite risks and one of my favorite subjects, weather, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll say, Robert and I have a very unique background where he and I I used to basically legally break into data centers around the world that his team was responsible of making sure that they looked pretty and passed audit. So, when he got to be brought in, he did the initial sweep. And I swear sometimes he would leave some certain things for me to find also as like a little bit of one, I don't know, it was a test, but it was like a fun game we used to play. I literally used to take posters down of signage, and we have some really funny photos of us around the world doing some really silly things in data centers. So if there's anybody I trust on cloud infrastructure and also how you actually set up IT environments in the most thoughtful way possible, Robert is one of my favorite friends to bring into the conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah. And Brian's comments before about preparation, right? Also humility in the space, right? We've seen some stuff, right? There's no other way to say it. We've seen some stuff, and you just have to kind of humbly admit it and get a plan to deal with it and work through it, right? So, all
Awesome.
right. So my widespread outage, and I mentioned I really like the weather. You can't get me to stop talking about the weather. It's a universal conversation piece, right? It's also a good way just to check in with people. My widespread outage is let's pose the Category 5 hurricane, right? The large hurricane is coming towards your cloud-based provider, and bad things are going to happen. This is one of the things where you'd think, it's not going to happen. But I was with a very large security company where we had a Category 5 hurricane march right up to Miami airport. And that was our DR site, supposedly, but we all knew that things hadn't been tested, and we thought it was good, and we hoped it was good. But when the Category 5 hurricane marches up on Miami, beach there, you need more than hope, right? You got to have your parachutes tested. And thankfully, it turned around and it walked away, which was amazing because we were just like, it came right up, took a good look at Miami and thought he didn't want anything to do with that. And it went off to the Atlantic. So we were very, very thankful. But that situation led to an honest conversation that ended up with the closure of the data center that we had there. It was a physical data center. And while it was rock solid on its lightning protection and its ability to pump water out from underneath, that storm surge was nothing it could survive. So anyhow, you wouldn't think it would happen. However, as you're seeing, the weather is crazy everywhere. In March here next week, Colorado is looking at 93 degrees for several days when we should be up to our knees in snow. So I think you could basically say weather is going to be an issue, and it's going to be an issue for you and for your data center providers. And it doesn't matter how big they are, AWS, you name it, it's going to be an issue. Okay, so that's our scenario. Let's see here. So identifying the risk, right? So where are you in the cloud? Say you've got what regions are you in? Have you spread that risk out a little bit, right? And that's where we start going into the risk statement here. What is the impact? So we have seen large public cloud provider outages recently. We've also seen war affect private cloud here in and around Saudi Arabia, right? 3 of those data centers have been hit. And the folks in those data centers that had their stuff in more than one region are happy campers, right? Because that's not something that you recover from very quickly. It's one thing to have a network outage. It's another to have a hole in the wall of your data center, right? So as far as your risk statement goes, this very quickly moves from an IT risk into a reputation risk, into a loss of customers, platform unavailable, transactions not working. And I know, Milu, in our case, we had SLAs, right? Everyone was like, don't worry, we have an SLA. And what was that worth?
Yeah.
Right?
And and a service level agreement, right? That's a potential agreement that a cloud provider might be committing to a certain amount of uptime percentage at the end of the day. So they're going to be available 99.99001% of the time. And I'll tell you, as lawyers, the 3 decimals after, we negotiate that a lot. So the service level agreement, not only is this a risk to the business, you're not actually potentially going to be able to deliver the service, but you actually might be hit with contract penalties because you're unavailable. And so this is one where insurance could help a little bit, but at the end of the day, if you're going to have to move providers, it's going to just get really expensive.
Correct. And your provider has an SLA to you, but in the reality of that is you can complain all you want and you might get some money back on your invoice several months down the line, but it's not going to save you in the moment, right?
Yeah, it's also cents on the dollar, so.
Yeah. So I've seen companies that are just like, oh, no worries, we got an SLA and lots of uptime. It's like, well, that's great until an outage happens. And we've seen power outages, we've seen cooling outages, which are lots of fun when the power is on, but things are baking nicely. All your expensive switches at the top of the rack are baking, stuff like that. So, anyhow, that is the risk statement. Do you want to go into a little bit about
I think
how we mitigate that risk?
100%. I think from a treatment for this one, I think unfortunately for a lot of companies, they don't think this is going to happen. I think I will say a lot of startups are very much in a single cloud region. They're not really thinking through redundancy. They're not necessarily planning on failing over to a different environment. They're just kind of hoping that the weather stays mild.
Yes. And depending on what is in that cloud, maybe dealing with the risk, the comment before was email, right? Maybe a loss of email is not that big of a deal to you and you can survive. Knowing that a region has multiple data centers in it, maybe you can weather, the AWS being down in your region for a short amount of time. But I think you can pretty much guarantee that something weather is going to affect you at this point, right? I don't think anyone has normal weather anymore.
Yeah. And I think when we're thinking about the likelihood of this risk, I actually loved using this example when I'm training younger compliance professionals and they're doing their risk treatment, because when you're thinking about weather patterns, there's so much data available for what's actually common on this one. So it's less kind of like, oh, we don't know. No, fortunately, there's true weather patterns here, and there's a lot of historical data. So it's actually a really great one if you're training a
Mhm.
team member on the first time of how to score a risk, of actually having them really start to localize, what is the likelihood that it's going to happen in this particular specific location where that data center sits.
One good example of that is we did a risk analysis between our Miami data center and our Amsterdam data center. And you would think that Amsterdam scores higher since it's below sea level, and it didn't, because at least Amsterdam has really good infrastructure to deal with it, right? Where in Miami, you have porous rock, the water's coming right up out of the ground. The infrastructure is different. The risk assessment that we went through was, hey, both of those scenarios aren't great, but let's focus on Miami first.
I love that. So yeah, I think this one will be hard for us to actually pick the likelihood of a risk, considering we didn't like pick a theoretical one. But if we're focusing on Miami, right, again, the likelihood, it is very possible that there's going to be a weather event.
Yeah. Yeah. Every year, hurricanes, right? Whether or not it's coming your way, but I think you can pretty much guarantee something's coming through.
Yeah. Hi, Debbie. Thank you for joining us. Okay, well, then let's talk about the harm to the business, right? I think, again, these ones, these like theoretical ones are really hard when you're even like explaining these risks to leaders, because people like Rob and I would be in the room being like, hey, again, ideally you have the stakeholder should really be doing the baseline, like initial gut check of being like, this a 3. That's my personal recommendation. I generally, as like, if you're not the technological expert on the particular thing, I would definitely trust the people in the room that are like, we think this is going to happen this, or we think it's going to cost the business this. It's the best justification. So Rob, I guess in your professional opinion, what would you think from the potential financial harm to the company?
Oh, if you did not make your stuff dedicated, highly available, and redundant across, and that data center goes down, especially a physical data center, could take a very long time for you to get back up again. The scenario being that data center in France that burned to the ground. The folks that were only in that data center, right now, your lead times for hardware are incredibly long because AI is sucking up all the hardware, all the memory, all the drives, all the processors, right?
Yeah.
So our time frames used to be 2 weeks, and now they're at least 90 days. And that's for the easy to get stuff. So yeah, it could be very, very bad.
So I'm hearing a minimum of 3, but where are you at on a 1 to 5?
Yeah. I was gonna say 3 to 5 is where I would score it. And that really depends on what you did with that risk, right? Did you avoid the risk by not putting all your critical infrastructure in one area? Are you avoiding the risk by knowing that you can fire up cloud based stuff somewhere else rather quickly, right? You've practiced this. That makes it a 3 in my book. If you've not practiced it, if you have parachutes but you never put them on and jumped out the window, then that risk score comes up a little higher, right? So yeah, 3 to 5. I'd be interested in seeing what the other group folks here think. Feel free to add it into the meeting chat there.
Yeah, so we're thinking we'll at least score this at a 9 up to a 15 is kind of what Robert's professional opinion is, right? So we've got a 3 on the impact, or the likelihood, and then we're at least at a 3, and you multiply those two numbers to get the initial risk score, right? And then the goal is that you're suddenly like, hey, we've added multi-region infrastructure, or hey, we've spun up a complete copy of our data center, and we're going to have 2 cloud environments, that are full like replicated copies. Ideally, they're geographically spread apart. I think that's a really important thing. I think making sure that they're far enough apart, right, so that if a natural event occurs in one place, it's not necessarily going to take down the other one, because then you really have not solved for anything.
Right. Correct. Or in a physical space, you have multiple physical locations. You have multiple lines coming in from different vendors. They're not in the same hop out in the parking lot that got
Yeah.
backed over by a truck, right? That's the voice of experience there. And it could be active, which can be rather expensive, right? If you have something where there's significant reputational impact or financial impact, but it could also just be active, passive, with an understanding that if you're back in a couple of hours, that's good enough, right? And so you're only paying for the storage in your passive side until you need to press the button and bring it up active.
Yeah. I love that. Does anybody have any questions for Robert while we're kind of starting to transition?
I figured Steve would jump in here since we worked together before too. I figured he'd have something to.
Oh, Steve, you're
Right.
getting a call out.
Yeah, come on, buddy. I worked with Steve before I was doing the infrastructure and the builds, and Steve was taking care of the security side. So it was great working with him.
Yeah, all of us used to work together, which is a really fun thing to say that we're all still friends.
Yeah, 90-day, exactly, right? 90-day lead times is a dream.
In gear would be a dream. My goodness.
It's because of the gear that I'm getting is common, right? But even then, I saw the prices double on hard drives and memory, right? And that was in the last month. They doubled some of the things, like if you're trying to get GPUs or something like that. I heard there's a Micron, I think it was Micron. Basically, they're making memory here in northern Colorado, and they're sold for 2026. All their capacity is already sold.
My goodness.
So,
Great
yeah,
day for
so
their
it's-
investors. My goodness.
Yeah, I was going to say another stock I missed, but yeah,
I love this. Well, Rob, can you let people know what the best way is to get in contact with you?
through LinkedIn, by all means, reach out. I think that's probably the easiest way. Just hit me up on a message, and my name is Robert Hug inside of LinkedIn, and I'll reach back to you.
I love that. Thank you so much. Again, these are the things that do keep a risk officer out at night. But I will say folks like Robert have made those things, for me at least, feel significantly easier. And so again, as you're kind of building out your risk framework with your team, definitely pull in the subject matter experts. And again, this would also be a risk that would be assigned to somebody like Robert within an organization. This would not be one that would be assigned to compliance. Would be one that, hey,
Exactly.
like on a quarterly basis, somebody like Rob needs to come in the room and actually talk about what he's doing to fix it and how confident he feels in the treatment.
Let's say, I'm pretty sure you did, didn't you? You went through and had me do like a weather-based assessment, and we also did a security assessment, right? Who could get into the data center and what could they do when they were in there? So it was very eye-opening.
They all failed.
But I mean, if you don't ask the questions and again take it with humility and grow from it, then that's how would you know, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you, Rob. Hopefully you'll still be able to kind of stay on in the background and jump in, because I've been very grateful that
Okay.
you've been attending. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, so now we're bringing Eliza back on. Okay, so again, you can give a quick intro to yourself. Eliza and I used to work together, and this one, with what we're allowed to talk about for the most part, this is an incident that actually felt real for us.
Quick intro for those who have joined since I was last here. I am Eliza. I am in the HR field, living HR at startups in my day to day. I've worked previously with Milu where I was sitting in the HR seat and she was in the compliance, and we came out of it friends. So that's a statement towards how we work together. For this one is Tuesday morning at 9:15. And I have just sent Milu an urgent message asking for a quick call. We always know that this means nothing good. Something unusual has come up during a routine internal review for us. A recently hired employee in one of our departments who successfully completed their virtual interviews, their reference checks, they did I-9 verification, may not actually be the person that we hired. During onboarding and the interview process, they appeared on video and provided valid documentation. However, after a few days of employment, the manager and other coworkers have come to the HR team saying, something's not right. We're noticing inconsistencies during meetings and communication. Upon review, we realized that this individual currently performing the job appears to be a different person than the one that we interviewed. Initial checks suggest that the individual who passed our interviews may have been acting on behalf of someone else, and the employee now accessing our systems is not the verified individual on record. We have already given this employee corporate email access, Slack access to source code repositories and development environments, and access to our internal documentation systems. At this point, we have to determine how has this happened, what access this individual has, and whether the company has already been exposed to internal risk.
This is a breach.
Sure is.
So this is an HR incident discovered and hidden as a data breach. So data breach in the plainest definition is unauthorized access to systems. And so that's something I actually get a lot of pushback when I talk to clients about being like, is this an event? Is this an incident? Is it a breach? Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a scenario where we have suspicion that a human being, employee's been brought on, was given access to systems. They are not who they say they are. And this one's actually surprisingly common. And so this is one that is a very common risk scenario that's actually playing out. It's a very common security attack, especially for companies in the government sector. So we're seeing cyber criminals, especially from non-US countries, that are coming in and actually targeting US defense contractors because they want access to whatever those defense contractors have access to, right? Those are the secret sauce that they're really looking for. They are doing this as coordinated efforts with folks on the ground in the United States who will actually pass verification, but then who actually rocks up to show up for work is somebody who is not who they say they are and can be really hard to spot. And unfortunately for companies, this is actually one hard to curb, especially in a remote environment. And it's also hard to report on. It's also like, usually you don't want to report a breach. The inclination is that companies don't want to say that they've had a data breach from a reputational risk perspective, but also this one could actually carry some serious criminal and civil liabilities for the company. So this one really is truly not only just an HR, but also very much a legal risk.
Absolutely. And it's like, even the most rosy outlook on this one is not great. Like even if they're there to have two jobs and, fleece some extra money, that's still not a great thing. I'll also say we're starting to see a lot more of this in workplaces with the advent of AI and interviewing. Like we're starting to see a lot of video spoofs, voice spoofs. It's much, much harder to
to discern who's real
and who's not real.
Oh man, it's a hard day to be an HR.
So hard. So for this risk, we're like, man, how do we avoid it? We certainly.
I don't think you can avoid it.
We can't. We have to do what we can to mitigate it, but a lot of that is like a large amount of effort and in a constantly changing environment. Like the discussions that we're having these days about like, do you have to worry that the person who's showing up on video is using AI to change their face is a wild conversation to be having with your interviewers who are like, making time in their day to try and jam in, trying to find new people for their teams. So it's a tough one.
So it's one we're going to mitigate, or we're going to try our best to mitigate. We're going to raise it. So we've identified it as a risk, right? Ultimately, there being an unauthorized individual that's gained access to corporate systems through a legitimate hiring practices. So this isn't where there was not an HR policy failure here, right? This was actually just a threat to the business where everybody within the team did what they were supposed to, but then somebody still slipped through the crack.
They made it through.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a place where we're going to take a really close look at our interviewing process to find any place we can bulk up identity verification at every single step. There's no like, we're adding a new step to our process. Maybe we are, but like, there's no magic bullet here that fixes this problem. Everywhere from how we train interviewers to the systems we're using to the steps that we put in place, kind of verify our interview process, we're going to be taking a look at changes. So this one is one that like, I think that this is incredibly likely that this will happen to pretty much every business at some point.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, so on a 1 to 5, sounds like Eliza's saying it's highly likely. I think I would probably, and again, this is why it's useful to have folks in a room in a conversation about being like, do I think this is going to happen 100% of the time? No, I don't think every company is going to experience this. I think it's absolutely possible and it is likely.
Yeah. I think, this is one where you're going to have to take a look at your business and say, if I am a remote business or like at least partially remote business where I have any level of my employees working 100% remote with no requirement to come into the office, I would say this is like going to happen. It'll happen to you eventually. If you're a workplace where you're more in person or hybrid, the likelihood is less.
Yeah. And I also think what we need to factor into is what type of data this company has access to.
For sure.
If they're a marketing agency, right, that has access to mainly public information of their clients, it's less likely for them. If they're a defense contractor that has access to information that are protected by certain levels of clearance or individuals need special rights and permissions to have access to that data, I think it's significantly more likely this could happen to them.
Yeah. I think it's also very likely for companies that fit the profile of tech companies on the forefront of tech innovation in a given area, because some of the people who do this are looking for source code. They're looking for intel.
Yeah. Which means you also need to think through what is the likelihood of which types of job openings these individuals are going to target. It seems to be for this particular attack, they do focus on engineering functions because they do want access to source code.
Generally, yeah, it's engineering functions. So many of our workplaces, you show up as an engineer day one and you've got significant access.
It's got all the keys.
Yeah.
Yep. You get keys, you get super admin privileges, get access to source code, you get access to the data repository where the actual customer data, the infrastructure sits in. So yeah, absolutely. I think like if you're thinking about certain roles that might be more likely to be targeted, could be infrastructure engineering or like software developer type functions.
Yeah.
Where again, the recruiting process might look a little bit different because those roles have been remote for a while.
They have been. Yeah. And I think, from what I've seen, and I'm, always curious what others are seeing as well here, but from what I've seen, it also tends to be like I hear leaning towards more senior roles for this one, because it's people who can you want them in the interview process. You're more willing to look to slide by things that may be inconsistencies because it's a role that you're really excited about. And that can make it harder to kind of tease those things out and also make it someone who's going to get more access in early days.
Yeah. So I think on the business impact, when we're tying this, say we're saying this is about a 4, we're thinking this is likely, say if it's a defense contractor or something like that. The operational impact from a financial perspective, again, this would ultimately be one that I would really ask the HR function and people ops leaders to define within the organization, to being like, hey, ultimately compliance is going to get pulled in because this is a data breach, right? And so usually the second you say breach, it pretty much always is high, if not critical risk to the business. So these are ones that, again, I think you and I have a different thought on this because I think we could see what the worst day scenario feels like in this type of incident.
For sure. I think as I alluded to earlier, it could be anything from someone who's just trying to get multiple jobs at once to make multiple incomes. And that's fairly not great, but benign, to someone who's trying to gain access to steal your source code and all of the highly sensitive data you have. Like the range on this is potentially large and highly dependent on what kind of business you are.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I think this one, is definitely a high for me. It's definitely a 4 and a 4, I think. Do you agree?
I would agree.
Okay. So let's think through. And again, for y'all, that are listening with us, please definitely do jump in comments and ask questions to Eliza. I'll say there's some cases out there that you can look at for legal precedents of actual foreign actors targeting companies within the United States with coordinated efforts between countries like North Korea, Russia, to actually go ahead and target U.S. companies because they have seen this particular incident play out effectively and they were able to get access. So it's definitely a real one. I don't feel like it's what I see a lot of companies talk about these days, or they're like, well, they passed the I-9, it's enough. And so why don't we talk through a little bit of what are the things that companies can do during their hiring process to implement those intentional additional checks on verification?
And this is what I expect with the way that we use AI in hiring over the next couple of years. Keep eyes on this one. It's going to change. But enhancing how we do identity verification at every step of the process, I think, can be very helpful, especially if you're a remote workplace, making sure that you are doing video interviews as part of every step of the process. I've seen some places do a video interview where they grab a screen capture at every step of the process so they can be like, is this the same face at every stage? So some simple things like that can help. Really, this is a place where anytime HR can be like, well, being better about your interview processes, like taking good notes, having good insights can really help. That is very true here. The more detailed we are in our interview process about noticing inconsistencies, the better we can catch these kinds of things. Another thing that we can do is, as much as possible, given the nature of your business, include in-person interviewing or in-person verification at the end of that interview process into your interview flow. Be especially making sure that if at all possible, you're doing in-person verification during onboarding. There are great tools out there to do remote I-9 verification, but they are not bulletproof.
No, they're not.
You can get through them. And the rules around I-9 verification and what you could do remotely changed around COVID. I would say they haven't fully settled. We just don't have the right way to do this remote yet. And that's opportunity for these kinds of folks to get through. If at all possible, I know a lot of places are starting to think about how do we make the first week of work in person, even if this person works remotely, which can have benefits beyond this, but is certainly a benefit here as well. There are ways that we can do video identity verification. There are companies that are thinking about this, especially companies that are using AI to do video verification in the interview process. It's a place I hold a lot of curiosity about, but I don't know that I am like, oh yeah, we've solved this. But there are a lot of tools out there that may be right for you or your company in how you're doing this. This is a place where having HR lean in into the interview process, or someone on your recruiting team who's a coordinator lean in, so that you're taking the onus off of the interviewers and you're making sure that HR and your talent function are helping note those inconsistencies. If you have someone who meets 5 different people through the process and no one has seen them as part of each of those interviews, it's a lot harder to say, like, are you the same person showing up for each interview? This is a place where we can also be better about running a background and employment verification, making sure that you're really using the best available to you in that process and you're not just doing it as a formality is very important to reduce this risk. So
Yeah, I think again, this is a unique one because yes, this is one that I think a lot of companies will be like, that's probably not going to happen. But if it does, my goodness,
yeah,
that is reportable. This is one that you do have to go to local authorities on this one. This is not just hey, this is one the FBI could get involved in this, depending on the type of cyber criminal. So this is one that unfortunately could lead to a lot of legal risks. So yes, if you're getting pushback from your leadership team that they're like, no, we don't want to pay for the heightened background check, or no, we don't want to pay for the, DocuSign review or whatever check. Like, there are different technologies that are available here to actually just make sure, like, hey, we want this one to go really well because we don't want to get into legal trouble here because, like, law enforcement will be involved in this one.
absolutely. Yeah, the small steps that you take are worth mitigating this one. And I think that, we talked already about some of the things you can do in the interview process and in the verification process. This is also a great reason to put pressure on your teams to set up good onboarding.
Yep.
To make sure that you have IT and security working together very closely during onboarding with HR to try and prevent these risks, or at least spot them early. You have good insider threat monitoring set up for your organization, and that you're, as much as possible, doing really well at least privilege access policies. Chances are that the person that you onboard day one doesn't need the keys to the castle on day one, even if they do eventually. So thinking about your onboarding as like, how do we give this person least access and then gradually ramp that access up as their job expands is a really good way to reduce this risk.
I love that. Okay. Well, yes, for those of you that want to continue to connect with Eliza, reach out to her on LinkedIn, Eliza White-Blum. And thank you so much for coming on multiple sessions here.
Of course. So happy to. Yeah. And click that link that Robert has put in the chat around FBI issuing alerts concerning North Korean workers infiltrating U.S. companies. This is real. It's out there. It's not, it's an easy one to be like, oh, that's a horror story that will never happen to me, but it's a real one.
Yeah. Yes, it is a very real one. Thank you so much, Eliza.
Okay. Well, we hope you enjoyed that additional look behind the curtain of a risk officer and what they go through and how risk should be assessed. Really interesting scenario with the HR security incident and how HR contributes to risk, something that we normally think is an IT security thing. Final reminder as we close out this episode that this is part 2 of 3. So make sure you listen in or watch next week as we will start to cover some more of those kind of, we never really thought about that type of scenarios. So we'll talk about a CEO phishing scam, as well as kind of what happens when a startup runs out of money and essentially the closing of a business, which, most startups don't make it into a public company. They either get acquired or they shut down. And so not an unusual scenario by any means, unfortunately. So tune in next week for that and the conclusion of our Risk Summit content. So we'll talk to you again next week. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.